Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining me today for episode 760 of the People Behind the Science podcast. Today, we are thrilled to be resharing our conversation with Dr. Francisca or Franca Ikuenobe, originally released on May 21st of 2018. Listeners, Franca studies rocks to understand the clues that they can reveal about living things, environments, and climates of the past. She's particularly interested in the microfossils of pollen, spores, and phytoplankton that are preserved in rock, and she uses these to help determine the age of rocks and what they can tell us about the history of a particular area. And in our interview, Franca talks more about her life and her science. So I hope you enjoy this episode of People Behind the Science.
Every day, discoveries are made that will change our understanding of the world around us. Dr. Marie McNeely is here to bring you the brilliant minds who are making these discoveries so they can share their incredible stories and take you on an amazing journey. Welcome to People Behind the Science.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the People Behind the Science podcast. Today, I am excited to introduce you all to our guest scientist, Dr. Francisca or Franca Ikuenobe. So, Franca, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you.
Wonderful. We are excited to chat with you about your work and your life. But before we go into all the details, I want to take a moment to introduce you to our listeners. So listeners, Franca is a professor of geology and geophysics at the Missouri University of Science and Technology, also known as Missouri S&T. She received her bachelor's degree in geology from the University of Ife in Nigeria, which is now called Obafemi Awolowo University. Afterwards, Franca worked as a production geologist and subsequently a palynologist for Shell Petroleum Development Company for a year before enrolling in graduate school. She received her master's degree in applied geology, also from the University of Ife, where she next worked as an assistant lecturer. Franca was awarded a Commonwealth Scholarship Commission Award for her Ph.D. work in geology at Cambridge University, and following the completion of her Ph.D., Franca joined the faculty at Missouri S&T, where she is today. Now, Franca has received numerous awards and honors for her work, including being named an Honorary Global Counselor by Missouri S&T's Office of International and Cultural Affairs, an elected Fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, an African Scientific Institute Fellow, an elected Fellow of the Geological Society of America, as well as receipt of the Distinguished Service Award from the Goretti Old Girls International Incorporated, and receipt of the Science and Technology Award from the Nigerian People's Forum. In addition, Franca has been awarded the Outstanding Teaching Award, Outstanding Students Leaders Outstanding Student Advocate Award, the Faculty Excellence Award, Sustained Excellence in Teaching Award, and also the Woman of the Year Award, all from Missouri S&T. And now, listeners, Franca is here today to talk with us more about some of her experiences in life and science. So, Franca, we want to know both about your scientific side and your human side. So can you start by telling us what you like to do when you're not very busy doing work in science?
When not doing science, I love to read entertainment magazines like Vogue Magazine and occasionally watch entertainment news on TV. That's all I do.
That is awesome. So are there any particular, celebrities or shows or anything that you follow?
Well, I love Entertainment Tonight. My family knows that. And once that comes on, I drop everything.
Yeah. That's a good way to escape from the seriousness of science, I think.
Yeah, correct.
Now, we love talking about reading on our program. So do you also enjoy reading books for fun as well?
Yeah, I do.
Awesome. Do you have a particular book you'd like to recommend for me and our listeners today to add to our own reading lists?
Well, my favorite book ever was The Godfather by Mario Puzo. Mm-hmm. I read it back to back, even before I watched the film. That's my favorite.
That's awesome. I've actually never read it myself, but there's all these cultural references to the movie. So I feel like I've seen bits and pieces of the movie, but never actually read the book. So I'll have to put that on my list.
The book is even better.
Yeah. I find that's often the case, though.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, I will put this on our reading list for our listeners to find. And we talked a little bit about what you like to do outside of science, but I'd love to talk about your work next. So, Franca, can you tell us how you describe what you do and what you research to someone who's not familiar with your field?
I normally tell them that I study rocks and the clues they hold about past life, environment, and the climate. I study the microfossils preserved in the rocks, such as pollen and spores, and phytoplankton, and use them to date the rocks, and then just tell a story about what now appears to be a piece of rock but actually holds all those clues about our past environment and life.
Very cool. And I know in our introduction, we mentioned that you previously held a position as a palynologist with Shell Company. And this is something I actually had to look up this word because I wasn't familiar with it. Can you tell us a little bit about what is palynology?
Even a lot of geologists don't even know what palynology is. Mm-hmm. It's a branch of paleontology, and we as palynologists study the organic world microfossils. A lot of microfossils have mineral worlds like calcite and silica, but you do have spores and pollen and other fossils like them that have an organic lining. And the organic composition withstands a lot of degradation over time. So they tend to fossilize well, where you cannot find those other fossils, like foraminifera, which are mostly calcareous or siliceous. They are very rare in some cases, but they tell us a lot, especially about the past climate.
Very interesting. Well, we learned something new today, listeners. I like it. Well, great to hear a little bit more about your work, and I'm excited to chat about it more as we go through our conversation today. But I do want to take a moment to talk a little bit about motivation. I think as a scientist, there's so much work to do and so many setbacks that you face that having a little bit of motivation goes a long way. So do you have a particular quote or a saying or something that really keeps you motivated?
I have actually two. And the first one is about life in general. It says, life is what happens to you as you are busy planning it.
I like it.
Yeah, that says a lot to everybody, I think, on this planet. And the second one is one that is very humorous. It's by Shariba. She was a humorist. And it says, expecting life to treat you because you're a good person is like expecting an angry bull not to charge you because you're a vegetarian.
Oh, that's awesome.
So they're both about life. So you can see that says something about me, not necessarily about science.
Absolutely. Well, I think you need these kind of general life motivators sometimes to just get out of the bed in the morning, in addition to the things that motivate you specifically about the work that you do. So wonderful quotes to share with me and our listeners today. And I'd love to hear a little bit next, Franca, about some of the people who might have motivated or inspired you throughout your own life. So do you have role models or maybe inspirational figures you could tell us about?
I think the very first role model for me was my mother. My mother did not receive any formal education because she grew up at a time in a part of Nigeria where women were not expected to be educated. And instead, the women worked to educate their brothers. And my mother regretted that all her life. So it was her mission to ensure that I got the education she did not get. She was my first role model. And as I grew up and was now in the university, I ran across another role model as an undergraduate. She was the only female professor in my department. And she was also a curator of the Natural History Museum at the time. This was in the late 70s, early 80s. Her name was Professor B.Sc. She's late now. But she was the only female I saw in the classroom in my 4 years in the university.
Wow.
And then for my master's, my external examiner was another woman from another university. And her name is Professor Adebisi Showumi. She's now an emerita professor at the University of Ibadan in Nigeria. She's still in my life today. This woman has been a source of inspiration. When I was working on my Ph.D., she came to visit with me at Cambridge twice, just to encourage me to do what I was doing. And those three women who have really inspired me in my life, those are my role models.
Oh, that's wonderful. I think it is so important to have these role models as you're going through these different phases of your career as a scientist. And I'm sure you yourself has served as a role model to so many students out there. So can you tell us a little bit about how mentorship and this being a role model for student factors into your current position?
Well, I think mentorship was one of the reasons I was elected a fellow of AAAS. Mm-hmm. It speaks volumes to me. I really don't always go out of my way to tell people I'm mentoring them, but I think maybe by example or just steering them in the right direction, that happens. But I'll tell you, when I first arrived here in Rolla, Missouri, I was the only female professor in the department, and my colleagues were so funny because any female student who had problems was sent to my office. Mostly about boyfriends,
Right.
not necessarily about their work. So I think in that respect, it's really important to see people who are either they look like you or you feel a connection to them and they inspire you. So you may not set out to be a role model, but by doing your work well, you inspire other people. And I also am the advisor for the African Students Association. I've done that for many years. And I think that in itself has helped some of these students because they come to me a lot for advice.
Absolutely. I think, like you said, kind of being that role model, just doing your work well, but also having your door open and being open to talking to students really can have a big impact on their careers. And wonderful to hear about some of the people who had that big impact on you. And we heard a little bit about kind of your early days in this description, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about what first got you interested in science. You mentioned your mom was very supportive of your education, but why science?
Maybe I had the knack for biology. Chemistry, not so much, but I did it anyway.
Me too.
And math, like most people, I was good at it. I wouldn't say I was great, but I also loved the humanities. That was the interesting thing. And that actually confused me a lot because my best result in high school was English literature.
Interesting.
Some people would tell me I'm still a good writer. My students will tell you that. I mean, I frustrate them because I correct their grammar, even today. And that's just the way I was trained. Even at Cambridge, my advisor did the same thing to me, and she said to me, you will do exactly the same thing. And I find myself doing that. So I was good in both arts and humanities and sciences. But somehow, I think by ending up in geology, it was because of my love for geography, which is a social science. That combination with chemistry, biology, and mathematics got me into geology. And while I was an undergraduate, one of my professors steered me toward palynology, which was, at that time, relatively new science compared to most top disciplines of geology. Palynology has been around, but a lot of people don't know about it. And I remember this professor said to me, why don't you go into palynology? You have the chance to make a name for yourself. He was joking. He said, there's too many sedimentologists in the world. You would just be one out of 1 million people. And I tried it. I said, I really don't know what palynology is, but I was ready to learn. And fortunately for us, we had a professor who had that expertise. So I conducted my undergraduate research with him. And the rest is history.
Oh, wonderful. Now, can you tell us a little bit about that transition from undergraduate to what happened next? Because I think this is sort of a sticking place for a lot of our listeners out there who might be trying to figure out what their next steps are and how to make their own career path.
I think it depends. Everybody is different. For me, after my undergraduate degree, I swore I wasn't going to go back to Ife. And the adage, never say never, is true because I ended up back at Ife. After saying I wasn't really interested. But then after working for Shell, I think it dawned on me that I really needed to advance my degree. And I wasn't really so keen in working in the corporate world at the time, which was why I went back to study for my master's. And while I was there, I decided I would go all the way. My mother asked me, why Ph.D.? Why did you not read medicine if you wanted to be called a doctor? And I said, I hated the sight of blood. But the reason I wanted to do a Ph.D. was just because I knew I could do it. It wasn't for any reason, really, because I think I enjoyed the challenge, and Ph.D. can be very, very challenging.
Certainly.
That was why I ended up taking that route. So after my PhD, I was actually hired by the then University of Missouri Rolla, which is now Missouri University of Science and Technology, halfway through my PhD.
Oh, wow.
And I think the offer came during my last year. So I had to pass and defend my dissertation before I could start. And I returned to London to obtain my visa to come here to work. And it was less than a month before I arrived to Rolla to teach. And I've been in Rolla since 1991, rose through the ranks from assistant through associate professor to full professor. And as a full professor, I've served as associate department chair for 1 year program head of geology and geophysics for 9 years, and interim department chair for 2 years and 7 months.
Wow.
That ended in August last year.
Not that you were counting or anything, right?
No, I had to as a chair. Mm-hmm. Anyone who's been a chair will understand why I was very specific. So that ended July 2017, and August 2017, I returned to my faculty position. So I've spent almost the entire academic career here in Rolla, Missouri.
Well, that is fantastic. And it sounds like you're having fun and you're still happy there, which is also good news, because next I'd love to hear about one of the projects that you have going on there at Rolla. So is there one that you're just really excited about working on that you want to tell us more about today?
Yeah, I'm working on an interesting project right now with a graduate student, a Ph.D. student, and collaborators at the Missouri Geological Survey, which is based here in Rolla. And that project is attempting to date one of 7 meteorite impact structures preserved along the 38th parallel in southern Illinois, Missouri, and Kansas. They are very interesting. You see all these round structures all along 38th longitude. And this particular one we're looking at is called the Decaturville impact structure. It's near the town of Decaturville here in southern Missouri. The age is unclear, and what we're trying to do is to use several methods or proxies, such as the organic world microfossils that I study as a palynologist, some spherules, which are round structures that are found in almost every impact structure all over the world. We've been able to isolate some of those, and some zircons. Zircons are minerals that are used for dating, like argon dates can be derived from those, or even uranium lead, to infer the timing of this impact. Mm-hmm. There is some speculation about the age of one of the nearby structures called the Woblo structure. So we'll see what results will tell us whether these structures are all related, whether they were formed roughly at the same time or not. So that's really exciting. We only started working on this last year, so the results have not quite come in, but we've already been able to isolate what we need for testing these hypotheses. It's one that is really exciting right now. So the student working on this is doing her PhD work.
Oh, very cool. So it sounds like you do a mix of both field work and then work in the laboratory as well, then, to work with those samples and to analyze them. Can you tell us a little bit about this kind of balance that you have between the field and the lab?
It depends. I may not have to go out to the field. Somebody else may send me the samples. It could be somebody else who did the field work, and we could all be collaborating and working on different aspects. And once in a while, I will go out to the field and do the field work. It all comes to money. You need money to go out to the field, and you need money to fund your project.
Right.
So the balance can shift at any time, at any point in time. So for me, all I need is my microscope. Once I have processed the samples, I'm a happy plant.
Excellent. Well, it's great to hear about some of the exciting work that you're doing right here, so close to home. And we brought up some of these challenges that scientists face in terms of needing money to do the fieldwork that they need to do and getting funding for research in general. And I think there are so many different kinds of challenges in science that researchers are facing every day, but the general public might not be aware of. So, Franca, do you have a particular challenge or a struggle or a failure of your own that you want to tell us a little more about today, and talk a little bit about how you worked through it?
Yeah, this is very personal, and it was about my promotion to full professor. I wasn't successful the first time I went through, and that was the first time I think I had failed in my life.
You made it really long without failing. I'm impressed.
Well, I think a big failure. Let's put it that way.
Sure.
There have been other failures, but when you are going for a promotion and you do not succeed, it's like you are being told you are not good enough. So it was a very painful experience for me, because it occurred to me as if it was a failure, a major failure in my career. So what I did was I asked for a meeting with our university's chancellor at the time, and we met for 1 hour. And the feedback he gave me during that 1 hour meeting helped me to prepare better for promotion 2 years later. So I learned to listen. I learned how to devote time to myself and not just helping others all the time. So I learned to lock my door a few times and not answer the door, just to be able to focus on my research and what I needed to do to shut out everything else while focusing on specific research tasks to advance my goal towards getting that promotion. And it worked. And I think everyone who is in academia can relate to the fact that time just gets away from you. You're so busy doing so many things. And this is where there's so much misconception about academia that as professors, we do nothing but just put our feet on the table and teach 2 courses, and that's all we do. That is very, very far from the truth. So that was one lesson, to take feedback and constructively use it. So I was able to succeed the next time I went up. Very personal, like I said. There have been other failures, but that one I needed to just share with your listeners.
Certainly. Well, thank you so much for sharing this story. And I think you're absolutely right. This sort of big failure that you faced was really a turning point. And I think the lesson that you mentioned here, the having to say no to some things to make sure that you're taking the time for yourself to get your own work done, is really important and can be really hard for scientists to do, because a lot of these opportunities that are coming at you left and right for presentations, mentoring students, working with collaborators, all these things sound cool and are fun, but they're not exactly what you need to do to get to that next step. And recognizing that and setting boundaries is really important.
It is very, very important.
Well, thanks so much for talking about one of these tough times in your own career, Franca. But can you tell us next about a success story, a happy moment? I know this failure had a happy ending in the end there, but is there another success story you'd like to share with us today?
No, I think the most recent one is my election as a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, AAAS. Mm-hmm. And that's one I really, really treasure. Because not only was the election about my career, it was about my role as a mentor. That's what the citation read. And for me, that's real success. To be able to touch students and other people, because the feedback is not always immediate. The students take your course. Sometimes they hate you because you push them. Some of them would love you. And then they graduate and they leave. So you really don't know at that point how much impact you've made in their lives. It's when maybe 5-10 years down the line, maybe you run across them at meetings or just anywhere, that you can tell whether or not you touch their lives. So this particular election as a fellow of AAAS was, for me, a recent success.
Absolutely. And congratulations to you on this prestigious election. And I'm curious to hear a little bit more about the process. I'm not very familiar with it. Where were you when you got the news and how did it get delivered?
I actually came back from another meeting in October and received an email. And we were not supposed to announce this for a month.
It's a long time to keep a secret.
It was. So that was a happy day.
Absolutely. So how did you celebrate that happy day? Probably in secrecy.
Yeah.
So do you have a particular way that you and maybe the students that you work with like to celebrate some of the successes that you have?
I don't know. I guess I'm very laid back. A lot of people tell me that I don't display my emotions that way. I guess to me, I was just doing my job.
Gotcha. Well, I think it can be hard to take time out to really consciously schedule a celebration for something. So that's something that a lot of scientists are working on out there, I know. It's always easy to just kind of get sucked back in and want to work on the next thing.
Yeah.
And we talked a little bit about some of the places that you've been for your training, Franca. And I know you've been able to do field work all across the world as well. And travel is a big part of the life of a scientist. So I love talking about all the great places that scientists get to go as part of their work. So do you have a favorite place, Franca, that your science has taken you?
Yeah. And that was Western Australia. Mm-hmm. My first trip there was in 2005. And it was to Western Australia and to Victoria, Australia. Victoria, Australia is where you have Melbourne. And what I really cherished was the opportunity to collaborate with 3 brilliant female scientists with diverse backgrounds and who were funded on a very high-risk project by the National Science Foundation to study the waters, the sediments, and microbial life in salt lakes, and to use our results as analog to life on the planet Mars.
Interesting.
So we went out there blindly, not really knowing what to do or what we were going to find. And we spent about 3 weeks in Australia. There were 7 of us on that first trip. And there were 6 females and 1 19-year-old undergraduate male. Mm-hmm. It was very, very interesting. And the results we found were really, really interesting. And we actually had an exhibit at the St. Louis Science Center for 6 years.
Oh, wow.
And this exhibit is now here in Rolla. It's in McNaught Hall as a permanent exhibit in a commons area, where we were able to see just remarkable similarities between these sediments and what was being beamed back by the Opportunity rovers. It coincided with when the Mars rovers were sent to Mars.
That's so cool.
So we now succeeded in securing funding a second time, a few years later, to return to Western Australia. And we drilled 10 lakes, and these salt lakes in their summer, which is January here, are totally dry. There's no water. Instead, all you see is salt in the lake.
Okay.
So we're able to drive rigs into the lakes to drill. So we drilled down, I think the deepest was 60 meters, to obtain deep time records to understand the evolution of acidity and hypersalinity of these lake waters. Because you find that Western Australia, all the groundwater is acidic. So we were in Kalgoorlie, which is maybe about 200-300 kilometers from Perth, and all the fresh water has to be piped in from Perth. So you see these huge pipes as you drive along the highway. That was the study. So that particular project in Western Australia for research, I would mention another place that I would say my work, not necessarily science took me there, was South Africa. Mm-hmm. That, I think, by far might be the favorite place I have visited, and I've been back 4 times.
So what did you like about South Africa?
Everything.
Yeah.
As an African, growing up in the 80s and 70s, and there was apartheid in South Africa, my first trip to South Africa was the last year of apartheid. Mm-hmm. So for me, it was a cultural moment. And I was able to teach and do research for 1 month as part of the University of Missouri South African Exchange Program.
Oh, wow.
And I'm still involved up to today. I'm still working with a professor from Cape Town. And I now serve on the system-wide committee for the South African Exchange Program. So South Africa, I would say, comes next to Australia in terms of the science, but as a place, I think it's my top.
Certainly. I mean, you witnessed a part of history that's huge. And now, if our listeners are going to either West Australia or to South Africa, can you tell them what are some things or the one thing that they absolutely must do when they're there?
South Africa, go to Table Mountain, go to Cape Town. Cape Town is one of the most beautiful places in the world. Just enjoy the scenery. It's beautiful. And Western Australia, there's just so much. We spent a lot of time in the outbacks. So if you're looking for kangaroos, you see them there in the wild. They're very shy. They're like deer.
Huh.
And Perth is a beautiful place. So my science has taken me all over the world, but I think what I enjoy the most is the culture. It opens you up. And I find that traveling reduces prejudice. People who travel understand that wherever they go, they are foreigners. And they learn to be more compassionate and learn to be accepting of foreigners. So just the cultural experience, I think, is worth all the travel.
Absolutely. And I love that you brought up this idea that travel is one of the things that kind of helps break stereotypes and break these prejudices that people may have. And I think there's so many different stereotypes out there about scientists specifically and sort of science in general. And I love to try and break some of those on our program by sharing some of these stories of the human side of science and really getting people to connect with our listeners out there. So one of these things that we love to highlight is some of the fun and funny things that scientists do when they're together, since it's not all serious. So do you have a particular funny tradition or a fun or funny memory that you've shared with colleagues that you can tell us about today, Franca?
We make fun of ourselves all the time. Mm-hmm. So as geologists, you have to be out in the field. You're sleeping in tents for weeks. I once spent 8 weeks in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean on a drill ship.
Oh, wow.
It's called the Joyous Resolution. It's owned by the IODP, Integrated Ocean Discovery Program. And we actually were drilling, I think, 100 miles off the coast of Ghana. And we were trying to understand how the Atlantic Ocean formed. Because when you look at the map of South America, and the map of Western Africa looks like a puzzle. You can actually fit both. And that's because the continent of Africa and South America were once one continent. So when the Atlantic Ocean started opening up, we actually were able to drill more than 1 kilometer below the sea floor. And guess what we brought up? Lake sediment.
Oh, wow.
The Atlantic Ocean started as a lake that has gradually spread apart. So while we were on this trip, 8 weeks is a long time to be isolated.
Mm-hmm.
With other scientists, we had over 100 people on this drill ship. Some of them were the drillers, and they were from different countries. There were people from maybe up to 15 or 20 countries. The cooks came from Portugal. The drillers were from the Philippines. And then we had the scientists were from about 12 countries. There were 30 of us who were scientists. Guess what? When you have somebody who doesn't shower for a week and you are in an enclosed space, that makes for an interesting time.
I bet.
So you learn so much about patience. You learn so much about yourself. So that one, I think, really made me grow. And that trip was early on in my career. And it opened me up to a lot of opportunities and learning how to collaborate with people. Because you can just do your own one science. The results you get, you want to be able to validate by testing what other people have done. So it's always good to conduct maybe many experiments using different methods on the same thing. So that's one of the memories I can maybe share with listeners and helped me grow a lot.
Well, I love this story, Franca, and I'm curious. I think I absolutely agree with you here that 8 weeks is a long time to be sort of stuck in close quarters with people. What do you do for fun when you're on a drill ship for 8 weeks?
Well, on your time off, you sat on the deck and watched whales.
Mm-hmm.
I saw mahi-mahis for the first time. They are huge, and they're always in pairs.
Oh, cool.
Just little things in life. And then the captain would announce to everyone on the ship, hey, there's another ship passing by, and we all rush out to look at the ship.
Right.
So it's like just anything to break the monotony.
Right.
And they were mostly oil tankers. And I saw some of the largest birds, the ospreys.
Mm-hmm.
They are huge, out there in the ocean, and just watching whales. I have pictures of whales that we took. It was 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week. So you were busy all the time.
Certainly. Well, it sounds like definitely an opportunity for growth kind of experience. I like it.
Yeah.
And I'm glad to hear you were able to at least enjoy some of the wonders of nature while you were out there sort of stranded in the middle of the ocean. But we've talked about some of the wonderful experiences that you've had as a scientist and some of the great work that you've been able to do. I'm curious, though, because I think a lot of scientists feel sort of limited in what they can do because of things like funding or staff or technology or just the feasibility of the questions they'd love to answer. So, Franca, if I took away all of the restrictions for you today, what is the one question that you are most interested in and would want to answer first?
Why did mass extinctions occur? As paleontologists, that's one of the questions we get asked a lot. I'll tell you, a lot of people who are geologists today or geoscientists, their love started from dinosaurs. So it's like, why are there no dinosaurs anymore?
Did your love start from dinosaurs? You were mentioning geology first. Did you like dinosaurs too?
I did, but geology was really never on my radar when I was growing up. But I ended up in geology. Life happens. And here, where I'm teaching, I get emails from high school students, even sophomores.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up having one as a PhD student. It's like we want to know more about paleontology, and it's because of their love of dinosaurs. And then by the time they start taking courses in geology, they find other interests. It's not all about dinosaurs,
right.
But that's usually their first love. So the question is, why did they die? Today we talk about the meteorite impact that maybe led to their death, but then why did mammals not die? That's the question. Because the mammals were around, but they were quite small. The huge dinosaurs who were dominant at the time, they died. And then you see selectively other organisms died, some in the ocean. So that's the real question. And you're right, funding is always one of the barriers we face as scientists to be able to do our work.
Certainly. And I love this question that you brought up because it is one of these great mysteries in life that I think a lot of people are familiar with because of, like you said, the dinosaurs, which everyone sort of has a special place in their heart for. So great question for us to ponder today. And we've talked a little bit about your career path. And I think there are so many people that you interact with along the way who can be great sources of advice. So Franca, I'd love to ask you today if you can give our listeners a piece of advice, maybe something that really helped you along your own path.
To be true to yourself and to ask for help. A lot of people do not know how to ask for help. And I run into this a lot with students. Many people think asking for help is a source of weakness. Rather, I see it as a source of strength. Without asking for help, you cannot learn or advance. So that's the best advice. Be true to yourself and ask for help when you need help. Don't pretend that you know it, even when you don't.
Oh, I think both of these are wonderful pieces of advice. And I'm curious, is this something that you struggled with yourself? It's something I know I struggle with every day, is like remembering to ask for help when I need it instead of just trying to bumble through on my own.
Yeah, that's the one I struggled with a lot. My mother, she said to me, I raised you to not ask for help because I raised you to be strong, to learn how to figure things out yourself. But please, ask for help, because I found out the hard way that people think you're fine when you're not fine. That was the best advice she gave me, and I'm glad she did, because she gave me that advice just before she passed away, and that was 2 weeks before I left for my Ph.D.
Oh, wow.
Had I not asked for advice at Cambridge, I don't think I would be here today.
Well, that is remarkable. And like I said, wonderful advice to leave our listeners with. Franca, is there any other piece of advice you want to give them or some inspiration you want to leave them with today?
Yeah, be proud of every contribution you make in life, whether it's in science, friendships, or anything else. Do not allow others to define your success.
I love it. Well said. And great message to our listeners. Can you tell them if they want to learn more about you and what you do, Franca, where should they go or how should they get in touch?
Well, they can check my work on the Missouri S&T website. It's gs.mst.edu, or they can send me emails to ikuenobe@msc.edu.
Perfect. Well, listeners, definitely get in touch if you have any questions for Franca. And Franca, thank you so much for joining us on the program and sharing a piece of your own story.
You're welcome.
Well, it has been a pleasure to chat with you and wonderful to have you here with us, listeners. We'll see you next time on another episode of People Behind the Science.